to me when I'm lonely. I take your hand and we go home.
Kristine Eckert, hello and welcome to Ghost Stories by the Fire.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
So I'd love to start out by hearing from you. Like when you were a kid growing up, did you grow up in a house? Like, did your family tell ghost stories? Did they believe in the paranormal? What was it like for you growing up as a kid?
I grew up in a haunted house, and everyone was in a lot of denial about the fact that there was definitely something going on in the house, and we didn't talk about it for a long time. And I actually, as the youngest child, I often got blamed for things that were going on in the house because that was just easier, right? Like there were mischievous things that were going on. So it's easier to say, like, I'm the youngest of four children and I was the baby of the family. My brothers were much older. So it always became, Kristine stopped doing X, Y, and Z. And I would say I didn't do anything because the house we lived in, I'll give you a little background of the house. So the house we moved into when we moved from New Jersey to Arkansas. And my parents found this house, and it was a very weird house. It was the person who developed the neighborhood made it for them, for his family. And he was trying for, like, I don't know what he was trying for, like modern. It was like a lot of weird windows, and like some were triangular. A lot of the windows were very high on the wall towards the ceiling. I think the idea of letting sun in, but keeping people out. So you didn't have to put curtains up. There were like real cobblestone stones in the hallways in the bottom of the house. There was a lot. It was like modern, but also kind of dark and shadowy in its own way. There was like a rock garden in the middle. It did not look like a quintessential like haunted house. And I guess this developer, the rumor was growing up that he had built it for himself and his family, and they only lived there for 4 months and they moved out. And then another family moved in and also moved out pretty fast. And then we bought it, and apparently it was a great price for the house because it's a pretty big house. And then, as I got older, there was a lot happened very quickly after we moved in the house. My brother was in a bad car accident, so there was a lot of time spent in the hospital. And then, my father, as you know, had cancer and he died. So stuff started becoming very evident after he passed away. And it was everything from doors opening and closing to footsteps on the cobblestone floors to things moving around. Like we wouldn't see them move, but say you put a cup down and you'd leave the room and the cup would move. These are the things that I would be blamed for, by the way. Like, stop moving my cup, or why did you do this? And I would, you left the door open, or you left the lights were a big thing. Lights would come on all the time. And I would get blamed for that kind of stuff.
Was there an uptick in all of this after your father passed away, or did it feel like it was always like that since the moment you moved in the house?
My memories are more after he passed away, but I was only like 4 or just turned 5 when we moved there. And like I said, there was a lot going on with our family. And a lot of times when my father was sick, I actually was sent to North Carolina to stay with family. So I wasn't even in the house. So I really I think kids just our memories start kind of solidifying at around 7, 6 or 7. So I don't really know. I think there was always, though, my brothers would say there was always something weird about the house. Like it always felt a little odd. You know, I mean, and it was also like upstairs in the dead of summer. My mother and I lived upstairs. Our bed, like my mother and my father's bedroom was upstairs. I had a bedroom upstairs. We were the only ones up there. And in the summer, it would be crazy. Arkansas is very hot in the summer. And there would be these pockets of cold up in the top of, like, to the point, like sometimes you would like, and you would see her breath in like the middle of summer. My mother finally admitted this years later because like no one believed me.
And when your family was blaming you for things you weren't doing, what was your response? Like, how did you feel? What did you say?
I was me. I mean, I would argue with them, and I think I would argue, and then sometimes I'd be like, okay, like I think I would say sometimes, like, I think something weird is going on in the house. I don't think I had the words to really explain, like, I think there's a ghost, but I definitely understood like something wasn't right in the house. But I was always kind of shushed, or I don't think anybody, especially my mother, who was dealing with so much anyway, didn't also want to deal with the fact that we could be living in a haunted house. But I'm trying to think of just one big story I remember, when I was probably, I have to describe my bedroom first. My bedroom was fairly large, and it had a very big walk-in closet. And the end of the closet, there was a door that went into the attic. And I was obsessed with, yeah, and I was obsessed with flowers in the attic and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So it was like the perfect combination of those two things. And I was always like playing in this attic space. But my mom said, and I don't know if this was true or she said it to keep me out of the attic, that a construction worker had died while they were making the house, and he had died in the attic space. So she was like, I really don't want you playing in the attic space. But I'm, you're a kid, and it's just like, and it's literally in my closet, right? So finally, my mom and my family got so upset that I was constantly playing in the attic. They put a padlock on the door and they locked it, so I couldn't get in there. And like my brother had the key. And so obviously I was devastated, but whatever. And one night, I was probably 9 or 10, my brother, I had been leaving all the lights on, right? And my brother said, if you leave any lights on, you're not going to go out to dinner tonight. You're going to stay home because we keep telling you to shut the lights off and you leave them all on. So I'm going to go check. And I was like, fine. So I made sure all the lights were off. He came upstairs. He looked, I'd even pulled my night light off, and he was like, okay, fine. So we all get in the car, and my mom had this giant Lincoln Continental. It was like the early 80s. And we're pulling out of it was a circular driveway. So as we're pulling out, all of a sudden all the lights in the top of the house went at the same time. And then we all saw in my parents' bathroom window a face like looking out, which was also weird because it was a very high window. And we all saw it. I mean, it was just like we all kind of turned at the same time. And my mom was just like, well, that was interesting. Let's go to dinner. And we just like drove to dinner. And when we got home, all the lights were off in the house, in the top of the house, every single one, every bedside table, every closet light, every bathroom light, and the light in the attic, which the door had a padlock on it. And my brother went crazy and tried to find the key, couldn't find the key. And like that night, like busted the thing off of the door, the lock, and like turned the light off. And I was like, see, I'm not the one leaving the lights on. It's not me. And that's just one of like so many stories like that in my family.
Is this something that you and your brothers talk about now but didn't talk about then? Like, I mean, was there conversation about you were just, if it wasn't you, they didn't want to talk about it sounds like.
Yeah. When we moved out of the house is when we started talking about it more. And they were starting to admit like there were very weird things that went on in the house. Like your favorite bagel story, which that story, and that was another one of those like moments where it was undeniable because we were all experiencing this at the same time. So for certain holidays, we lived in a town called Jonesboro, Arkansas, and that was about 45 minutes from Memphis, Tennessee. And so on holidays, we'd get dressed up and we'd go to this really nice hotel called the Peabody in Memphis. And, we would probably be gone for like 8 or 9 hours. And so we had gone to Memphis and I think it was Easter, and had like a big buffet and like, hung out in the hotel. And then we drive back, we get home, and all the doors in the house are open, all the exterior doors, and not like unlocked, but like wide open. And it's like the front door, the back door, our sunroof door was open, the sliding door in the back, like in the house was open, like everything was open. And so my brothers immediately, my mom and I stayed in the car. My brothers like went in the house to make sure like someone wasn't in there, and did a check. Nobody was there. And we all come in and we go in the kitchen and we look, and there is a freshly toasted bagel sitting on a plate with cream cheese and a knife. And you can still see it's hot. And we were just like, we all look at it. And the thought is either some stranger has come in our house, opened all the doors, nothing was missing, and for some reason made a bagel and left it here for us. Or like, how do you explain that? And this is my mom's denial. She went over, she put a smear of cream cheese on it. She took a bite and she was like, well, this is a lovely thing to come home to. And then just like walked out of the room.
That that's amazing. That's an amazing. Well, I love the idea that like it makes sense that when you're living in a place that seems spooky, the denial, right? Like I know when you were a kid, I don't know if this was true for you. I would feel like if the ghosts don't see me looking at them, then they don't really exist and they can't get me. Like there's this kind of safety I feel like in absolute like ignoring actually what is going on. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Like because and also I think this was in the 70s and 80s when we were like I don't think people were it was as accepted. Like now it's so taught like this is a podcast where we're talking about it and there are articles written about it. But I feel like back then, if you talked about like ghosts in your house, you were like the Amityville horror family. You know what I mean? Like
Exactly.
it
Well, and that
it
was
wasn't
where it all
accepted.
lived. Like horror, like
Yeah.
ghost stories and haunted houses. That was like the territory of Peter Straub and Stephen King, and that was like pretty much it.
Yeah. So it's like it just made you seem kind of like kooky, you know? And again, I think my mom especially was dealing with so much that she just didn't want to deal with it. And I'm sure there was a part of her too was like, was it my father coming back? I mean, my brothers and I would talk about that. Like, was this like our father coming back to kind of touch base, like communicate? Um, was it this construction worker? There were rumors that the neighborhood was built on an Indian burial ground. Like we would, we would find like arrowheads and artifacts all the time. So there were all those, I don't know. And again, I think it was too much to like wrap their head around.
If you had to take a guess, do you feel like the energy in the house was attached to the house itself? Was it kind of the collected energy maybe around the trauma and energy of what your family had gone through, or a little bit of an intermingling of both?
I wonder if it wasn't I think about that sometimes, especially because it was a coincidence that there were two families that moved in and out. Or and honestly, and I don't, is that true? I don't 100% know. Like, I don't have the records to that. That's what I was told. Um, and then we stayed for as long as we did. I don't know. I'm sure the energy in the house, you also have to look at one of my brothers was mentally ill. And so I don't think that caused anything that happened in the house, but I don't think it helped the energy of the house. It definitely did not help his mental health, you know because I think he sometimes had trouble separating he had trouble separating reality from fantasy or what was in his head. And I think having those things happening made it even worse.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure. It's an interesting line, and it's something that, like myself, as a tarot card reader, teacher, and expert, something that comes up again and again when you're doing occult or metaphysical or meditative work. You're often using your sacred imagination, right? That's the basis of a guided meditation is you're journeying in your imagination. So the interesting question is always, where does the imagination end and something actually real begin, right? It feels to me like there's it feels like quite a gulf of a threshold space, where the imagination leads into things and energies that are perhaps coming to manifest in this world. I don't know. You're a writer, so I'm sure you've had a lot of experience with that as well. How do you, I don't know. Have the things that you have written ever manifested in real life for you?
no, but you know what I was thinking about? I don't really write ghost stories. And I wonder if I don't really write about it because I lived it for so long that it doesn't feel like escaping into anything because it was such a part and still remains weirdly a part of my life. I just was thinking about that today because you and I are both writers, but we write very different
Yeah.
things. you know?
Would you say that collected experience certainly is something that bonds you with your brothers?
You know what? There was a period, kind of, but we don't really talk about it anymore.
No.
I mean, we did for a period of time, but they're not as interested in the supernatural realm or any of that in a way that I've always been. Like I've always been interested. I think because of that and because I was a big Stephen King fan growing up, like you mentioned Stephen King, and growing up I watched a lot of horror movies, and I was always very, very interested in like how the occult can manifest, and like I said, like ghosts and supernatural occurrences. But again, it goes back like what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Was I interested in that because I was surrounded by it? Was I, you know what I mean? Like I don't know which one it was. It has always interested me.
And now that you're all grown up and the mother of two extraordinary twin girls, have you noticed any ghostly activity kind of around them or coming through them? Because children, of course, are kind of so wide open to those things that adults are very quick to dismiss. So I wonder if you're seeing any kind of repeat behavior with your own girls or interesting things in the house that you live in now.
Well, as you know, Sash, I remember you were alone in my house once. Do you remember this? The girls were very young. I was taking them to school. You were visiting, and I came home, and you said, "There is a lot going on in this house."
Oh, yes.
You were so we moved into this house when Sedona and Zoe were 2 years old. They had just turned two. And the answer to your question is yes. We've definitely experienced stuff specifically with them. Um, we experienced stuff when they were little in our old place, and we definitely experienced things here. This is something to put in though. Since I've been with Jesse and we've been together for 13 years, Jesse says that every house he's ever lived with me in, things have happened in it. And he's never had experiences like that until he lived with me. And I have had mediums say, it's not the houses that you happen to be living in. It's actually you are bringing. I seem to be some kind of like
A magnet.
a magnet, but I'm like, I'm the weirdest magnet because I'm like, well, I can't communicate and I can't help them. But
Have you tried?
I
Have you actively tried to work with the energy?
kind of, but I don't know. I mean, maybe I am blocking it out. I have no idea. But even as a child, like I recognize things were happening, but it's not like I never saw anything. My daughters have. I have not. So going back to when we moved in, when we bought the house, there was a piano in it, and the owner said, "Would you like to keep the piano?" And I, being a mother of young children, I thought, well, this would be great. Children should grow up around music, and maybe this will inspire them to want to take lessons. And so we said, of course, yes, we'll take the piano. So when probably about 5 months after we moved in the house, I was bathing the girls, and they're, toddlers. And so I would take one out, dry them off, and that one would just run around naked while I was trying to get the other one out. And so I had gotten Zoe out of the tub and dried her off, and she was running around, and I'm drying her sister off. And all of a sudden she runs back into the bathroom, and she says in that very kind of toddler way, like, "Mama, there's a man at the piano." Yeah. And I think my heart just stopped. My thought was immediately, someone has broken into our house. And Jesse was working in Venice and he had a long commute. He wasn't home. And that was my immediate, like, oh God, like someone's in the house. And she spun around and ran back in that direction to the piano. And so I scream and I follow her, trying to like grab her. And she's running around where what we call the music room, where the piano is. And she's kind of like dancing around and laughing. And of course there's no man. And I check the whole house, and I'm checking all the doors. I'm checking all the locks. No one's there. I get them in their pajamas. I get them their babas. We sit down to read a story. And then I say to Zoe, "Do you remember what you said about the man at the piano?" And she said, "Yeah, he was fixing the piano." I was like, "What do you mean?" She was like, "He was fixing the piano. He was fixing." I was like, "You mean he was playing the piano?" Because she had like that very broken way of toddler speaking. She didn't have a ton of words at that point, or like a ton of complete sentences. And she was very adamant. She was like, "No, fixing. He's fixing the piano." And I was like, "Okay." And so then I started asking her questions like, was he tall? Is he tall or short? Tall like daddy or shorter? And she said, tall. And I said, dark hair like daddy or light? She said, light. And I said, dark eyes or light eyes? And she said, light eyes like me. And I said, okay. And that was it, you know. And then Jesse came home that night after I checked them in, and I told him the story. And he said, well, I didn't want to alarm you, but sometimes late at night, I hear the piano keys tinkling, but like very, very lightly, as if someone is just testing them. But I didn't want to. So this goes on, sometimes she'll say like, oh, the man at the piano. And then it became outdoor stuff. They would be outside playing and I would be doing something in the yard. And Zoe would run up to me in tears and say, the man who fixes the piano is fixing. And then she started calling him the man. The man is here and he's fixing things in the yard. And he yelled at me and told me not to do something, which I think he was telling her not to do dangerous things. Like, and her sister would say, well, she was she was standing on the chair, and I was like, oh. And so she really saw him a lot. And then when it came to, we finally had this night where they were in the bathroom brushing their teeth. And all of a sudden, in that very creepy way children have when they just like stop what they're doing, she turned to me and she goes, Mama, the man is here. And I was like, oh, where's the man? And she said, he's in the hallway looking at us. Meanwhile, and I was like, ooh,
I have chills.
I know. And her sister, so Sedona's sitting there brushing her teeth and clearly is seeing something and doesn't want to admit it. And I'm like, Sedona, do you see something? And she's like, not me. And so that happens. And I'm just like, what is this? And we, in the meantime, had been getting mail from the previous owners. You would just always get like previous tenants. But then we would get this one man's mail who was not the previous owners. And I'm like, this is probably the original owner, because I think it had only had 2 owners before us. So we Google the name and it pulls up an obituary with a man's picture with light gray hair and light eyes. So the next morning, Zoe's in her high chair. That's how little she was, like in her high chair having her breakfast. And Jesse shows her the picture. He's like, Zoe, I want to show you something. We don't say anything to her about what it is. And we show her the picture and she looked at it and she goes, that's the man, Mommy. That's the man who's always fixing the piano and outside. And we were just like, ah! And we found out later through neighbors that he had, in fact, died in the house. And yeah.
Did he die a natural death or?
It sounds like he did. It sounds like he died. And what we didn't realize in California, you do not have to let people know, like divulge if someone passed away peacefully in their home. You only have to disclose if there's a murder. So we were like, great.
Wow.
And then we finally, it seemed fine. And we just kind of were like, all right, so there's a presence here. He seems to be harmless. While that's happening, by the way, they also start playing with the girl in the blue dress.
What?
You ask, I know. I came in one day and I think it was Sedona was like sitting with her little legs crossed and talking very clearly, like having and it was one of those things where I was like, oh, does she have an invisible playmate? Like this is the age where but it seems so specific, almost beyond, like more complex than I felt like a child should be able to do. And they're kind of like muttering, like almost like her head is bent close to another child's head talking. So I say to her, who are you talking to? And she says, the girl in the blue dress who lives in our closet. And we play hide and seek. I don't mean to be laughing, but I know your expressions are hilarious. But yes. So then I asked Zoe, and Zoe says, yeah, there's a little girl in a blue dress. And they describe a little girl with like curls and a little bow in her hair. And she has a Peter Pan collar and this blue dress. Very nice. Like the way they described it, it sounded like a very kind of 1950s era dress. So I'm like, great. So now I have an old man fixing the piano and working in the yard. And I have this little girl like playing hide and seek and living in the girl's closet. And sometimes at night they'd be like, Mommy, can you check the closet and make sure that the little girl's not? And I'd be like, ugh. Like I'd open it, just be like, please don't. I don't want to see. Maybe that's why, Sasha, I can't see anything because I really don't want to. But we were like trucking along and like, okay, so we've got a little girl and an old man. Everything seems fine. And then one night Zoe woke up hysterically crying and screaming and saying that the old man was like standing over her while she woke up and he was over her bed, and that freaked her out. And Jesse got very upset, and there were talks of like hiring someone to do like a cleanse, but you're never supposed to do that. People can't get rid of spirits unless they want to go. So I did research and I called I think it's the California Parapsychology Organization. And they sent a medium out just to do a walkthrough, just to give us an idea of what was in the house and also some ideas of how we could help send them on their way. So she came and did a walkthrough. We weren't allowed to talk to her ahead of time. She didn't have any information. That's how they do it. And when she was done, she said, well, there's definitely the old man who used to live here is still here. And he's very attached to the house. It's still his house in his mind. And she goes, and there is a little girl in a blue dress here who I sense drowned. So she was like, do you have a pool, or do you have neighbors with pools? And then the little girl was with a woman in her 40s who she described as very sad, and who was with the little girl, but they were not together in a previous life. They kind of met as spirits and had become like companions in the afterworld.
Companions in the afterworld.
Yeah. And she sensed that the woman probably when she was alive may have lost a child. And that's why she had kind of bonded with that child. And then she said there was a man with like a top hat. So we were talking about it, and she said, I was like, I understand why the old man's here. I don't understand where these, like, because she was like, I definitely think the little girl drowned. And I was like, well, there's no pool here. She goes, well, maybe she was kind of trying to think about it. She goes, but there's so many spirits here that honestly, they're either attracted to you or your children, because children tend to not have much of a veil. Like we shut that down as we get older, but children have, that veil is very open for them. Yeah. So she gave us some tips she talked to all of them and said, it'd be really good if you could move on. But she did say, she goes, the old man's he does not want to leave. She goes, the other ones I'm trying to like usher out and tell them there's a better place, but he really likes to be here. And so we burned a lot of lavender and had talks, and we're just like, basically kind of like, we'd like you're scaring our daughters. If you could just like maybe not appear or scare them when they're sleeping. And now I think, honestly, he's still here. He's 100% still here. And now I'm kind of like, you know what? Maybe it's not the worst thing. Like maybe he does look over the house, and it kind of gives me a strange comfort. Mm-hmm. Oh, and here's another weird thing. So our garage, when we moved in, still had his workbench and all his tools and like nails. Like he made a workbench in the garage where you could tell and there's a rear view mirror. So he must have sat there with the garage door open and would work and he clearly probably smoked cigarettes.
How very 70s, 60s and 50s of him. I feel like
70s,
back in the day, all the men had a workroom.
They did. And it's interesting to me that all that stuff is still there. And I don't want to move it. And I'd actually met the previous owner, this guy, Adam. And I asked him, like, he's the one who told me, like, yeah, the old guy died in the house. And I was like, oh, thanks for telling me now. But he said, I was like, why didn't you ever throw away his tools? And he goes, I don't know. I just felt like he was going to get really upset if we throw away the tools. So Jesse and I haven't thrown it. We just keep them over. We're like, you know what? You just have your workspace. I really do think he hangs out there most of the time. Mm-hmm. The girls don't see him at all anymore and don't really. Sedona weirdly kind of remembers. Zoe seems to not remember at all.
Does Sedona remember the little girl in blue?
I have to ask them again. I feel like I asked one of them and they were kind of like, I don't really remember that. But I think what's interesting is I think Zoe really thought that he was a real person. I don't think she understood. Whatever she was seeing seemed very clear to her. I think what Sedona was seeing looked like some kind of apparition, because her reaction was like, this is not okay. Like, this is not something I want to be seeing. Like, she was very like, nope, I'm not looking at that. But what's interesting now and then is, like, if I go in the garage at night, because we keep the paper towels and things like that, I will definitely go in there, and there are times I can definitely feel like a presence, and I can smell like Marlboro cigarettes, like as if someone had been smoking. And obviously I don't smoke. Nobody in our family smokes.
Do you speak
And
to them?
I don't know. I'll just be like, I'm just getting some paper towels. Like, I'm trying not to, just stay in here as long as you want. Please don't come inside. But he's never bothered. He's never, either the girls can't, they definitely don't see him anymore. Like, I have asked them that. They're like, no.
Yeah.
So
I find it so interesting that at the beginning and the end of life, this is when like the veil grows thin, and it seems like people see things on the other side, because hospice nurses and people who have been with friends near death at their deathbed, it seems like a lot of people are talking about the ones who've passed over as if they're right there at the end of their bed, kind of like in the room, just as present or you and I would be. So I just think that that's super fascinating. What is your sense? What does all of this kind of give to you in terms of like how, your ideas of the afterlife? Has it affected the way that you view these mysteries that nobody can quite nail down? And what is your sense of what happens to us? Both before like where were we before and where were we after? I love this question.
well, I definitely don't think, I do know I have some friends who believe that we just die and that's it. And maybe it's me as an optimist. I just have never felt that that is the case. But again, I've grown up in a having a life experience that over and over again has told me that there is something beyond. Because I don't know if you know this story, but my brother Martin, when he was in this bad car accident when he was 17, he was in a car with three other friends, and it was very bad. Like, I think one or two of the people died, and my brother almost died, and he was in the hospital. He lost a leg, he lost a kidney, he was in a coma. And this was in the 70s, and they didn't even, I don't think they helicoptered people. So they had to take him to a trauma hospital in Memphis, and they had to take him in an ambulance. And they told my parents that he died several times on the way to the hospital for minutes at a time, where he would just not have a pulse, and then they'd bring him back. And my parents said he was so angry when he like finally woke up. He was, he's in a brief coma. And when he finally came to, he was mad at them, because he was like, I don't understand why you just didn't let me die. Like, why am I still here? I shouldn't be here. And he never got over that. And when he finally, I remember talking to him about it when I was older. I mean, he wouldn't talk to me when I was a kid, but when I became more of like a teenager, I remember we talked about it, and he said that he definitely was in that light, and he saw all these dead relatives, some of which he knew were people from like that were there to greet him that he didn't necessarily recognize. There were definitely people he did recognize, and that he just felt this like wave of like love and warmth, and just like a feeling he'd never had living. And he was angry about it for the rest of his life. So this kind of puts a button on the house in Arkansas. So we had sold that. And this is when my family all openly started talking about it. Like, even my mother a little bit, but definitely my brothers. So my mom finally sold the house, and she moved into a condo, like in the same area. And so it was like the last, I think we were all ready to like not be in that house anymore. Also because there was so much emotional stuff intertwined with like my father's death, and just not a lot of great memories. Like, we moved in that house, and like a lot of bad things happened in our family. So I don't think there was a lot of great things attached to it, but still it was the last place we lived with our dad. And I think my brothers kind of wanted to pay respect to that. So the house was empty. I think it had been sold, but we still had the keys, but everything was cleared out. There was no, electricity or anything. And my brothers like went into the house and brought like candles and some alcohol. And they were kind of like, they lit candles and they were just kind of talking about like memories and whatever. Maybe my dad or family. I wasn't there, so I'm not quite sure. But then they said at some point, and all three of them agreed that this happened. They were sitting there, and then it got very cold. Like it was already cold a little bit outside, but I think it just got like freezing cold, like that. All of a sudden, they could all see their breath, and they all at the same time just sensed a very ominous presence that was clearly like, "Get out of the house." I don't think they heard anything auditory, but later they all said at the same time they sensed just "You are not welcome here. Get out. Like you need to leave." And they all just like, and the candles blew out too. It was like candles blew out, cold air, frost coming out of mouths, and just an overall horrible feeling. And they were like, and we're out. We're out. We're done.
We're done. Did any of this behavior follow your family to the house that you moved to after this Arkansas house?
Not in that way. Mm-mm. I mean, there was still, my mom still had her issues. My brother still had his issues, but that the heaviness of that house didn't really, I don't think, transfer in that same way.
Isn't that
Like we never experienced like a family, I guess a family haunting in that same way,
Mm.
And I'm the only one that seems to have, if it happens to my siblings, they really don't talk about it in the same way that I will share stuff.
You mean in their current lives?
Yeah. Like and even if I mention stuff, it makes them uncomfortable. They're like, I don't want to talk about that.
Have you checked on Google Earth to see if the house is still standing?
It is still standing, and it looks a lot better than when we lived there. I think they built stuff onto it, maybe added a pool. They definitely, it looks better than when it was a nice house, but it looks nicer now.
So I want to share something that freaked me out to no end, and I kind of love that this happened. But at my grandmother's house, where I used to spend every summer growing up, my grandmother, her second husband, had been married prior to her, and in the house that she moved into, there was this giant spiral staircase. This big beautiful house in New Canaan, Connecticut, and in the spiral staircase, which was right there when you would walk in the main doorway, there was even an alcove with like a Greek statue. It was very dramatic. But what had happened was that her husband Don, who loved to drink, had his first wife Bun had accidentally fallen down the stairs to her death. And so literally the quote unquote fallen down the stairs to her death was code for the fact that he could get really mean when he drank. And so the subtext was that his wife had been pushed down the stairs by him, but everybody referred to it as when Bun fell down the stairs and died. So my sister and I were literally growing up, spending our summers in this house with the specter of Bun's ghost. And I would always picture, like, I never saw anything, but in my imagination, I would see her like body, like at the bottom of the steps. And anyway, it was a great haunted old place. But years and years later, when my grandmother moved into assisted living, they did sell the house. It was bulldozed. And of course, they put up a McMansion over the space. And so I went onto Google Earth and saw this giant new McMansion and the crazy new layout of how it was. But the most fascinating fact was that the front door and the new staircase winding is exactly in the same spot as the original staircase and front door, even though the entire layout of the house is completely different.
That is crazy.
Completely I like screamed, and I just thought, energy has an interesting way of collecting, and maybe it's a coincidence. Maybe it's a coincidence.
And repeating. I mean, it'd be interesting to know if that whoever designed it or, didn't have this impulse Bun wanted her stairs.
Mm-hmm. And it was that space that we all kind of tiptoed through, and it was just always there. It was just always, I think, in everybody's imagination that she had perished at the bottom of those stairs. And none of us used the front door. We all used the side kitchen door as the main, like, in and out. But yeah, so it's interesting because it does feel to me, when a house is finally bulldozed, taken down, there does seem to be a big energy release. I mean, I see it all the time in New York City where they're taking down buildings left and right. And it does often feel like a big kind of open gaping hole. There does seem to be an energy release, but I do think that, yeah, like some things do seem to remain. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, it's interesting that you bring up energy because I have thought about this a lot because I remember watching a documentary about like ghost sightings but the sighting is very repetitive. So I remember there was some like, most haunted mansions show on that I was watching. And there was some antebellum plantation house that now is a hotel or a bed and breakfast. And it's well known because there's this little girl in like 1800 style clothes, and people see her doing the exact same thing over and over again. And there are, parapsychologists or people who are into the supernatural or ghosts who say that is not actually a ghost, but it's a repetitive energy.
Mhm.
Like there's an energy that's stuck on a loop. And so we're not really seeing maybe a spirit, but we're seeing more of the energy of something. But then there's, sightings of ghosts and apparitions that interact in a space. And a part of me is like, I don't know, does that always go away? I think it depends on how much that entity doesn't want to leave.
Right? Or how the energy is, right? How and speaking of antebellum, I was recently in New Orleans, and you can feel, like, I think trauma being so intense. I think love too. I think love can be as intense as trauma, but I think that trauma has a way of intensifying the energy of what goes on, and it's something that you can certainly feel when you move into certain places. But to your point about repetition, I think that what's interesting about, say, the repetition of a ghostly energy, a traumatic energy, or just a repetitive energy, is that we all, like, repeat patterns in our lives. And of course that's why, nature in and of itself, when it finds something that it works, that leads to life and to expansion, nature is very good at repeating that, right? That's why a willow tree, if you look at the branches, looks like the veins of our heart, and that's why you see, like, things that are, like, good for your brain, like walnuts, actually look like a brain, so when nature finds something, like it'll just do the shortcut. It'll always work. So I think that it's an interesting study in how we ourselves tend to wash and repeat ideas and thoughts and habits that keep us safe or keep us feeling secure. But I do think that it's the innate point of the universe to evolve, right? To break those patterns. So I suppose, in a way, when a house is taken down, and the energy is finally released, that seems like it would be very much quite a good thing. I don't know. What do you think?
Or like, could it really? Well, yeah, I think maybe if like a spirit, it's making me think back. Years ago, I worked in this hotel in Santa Monica, and it was the tallest, called the Radisson Huntley at the time. It was the tallest hotel in Santa Monica. I think it was 20 floors, and it was very well known that there were a lot of suicides out of their hotel because people would go and, like, they'd jump out of either. They actually made all the windows plexiglass, but you could still go in the stairwells, and they were open. And so there was a story about the woman in white who would walk through the hotel, and apparently so people would see her come out of the elevators. It was only late at night. You'd see her come out, and she'd go through the dining room, and she'd disappear around where the kitchen was, where there was a stairwell with an open space. And apparently that's where she jumped. And one night there was one of our bartenders who had been there forever and was a closer, was so shaken because he was there all by himself, and he sees her come in, and he said, "Kristine, she looked like a woman, and I thought it was a hotel guest." And then I looked down, and from her knees down, there was nothing there. And he was like, so she was walking, and he was like, ma'am, ma'am. And then he looked down, and he was just like, and this was a very kind of macho older man. And he would not work the closing shift. My point of this, though, is that many people had that sighting, I guess, with this woman. And she was clearly repeating this traumatic event, like stuck in some kind of, I don't know if that was her energy, the spirit herself was just stuck on this loop. So if the whole hotel came down, would she then finally be released? Because how do you, like, if your loop space is gone, or does it somehow still remain? I don't know.
I don't know.
Again, I think it goes back to if they want to be released or not, or if that's maybe the final push. Is Bunny still in that space in New Canaan? Buns? Maybe.
I could, to be honest with you, feeling what I would feel and looking at that house as it stands today when I found it on Zillow, it's a fabulous. It's a fabulous house. I'd want to live in that house. It's a total upgrade. It was a fancy house when it was built, a fancy New Canaan house, and now it's an even fancier one. These are interesting questions, and ones that I don't think that we're ever going to get a concrete answer to, but it is always kind of remarkable to me. I think that when we look into like that shady area between life and death, we find things to be a lot more similar than they are different. I don't think there's that much difference. My hunch is that between this world and the next. I have so loved talking to you, and I feel like we've only scratched the surface. So can I request in advance that you'll come back and have another conversation with me at the fire?
A part 2?
Yes.
Yes, I will absolutely come back.
Thank you so much for being part of Ghost Stories by the Fire. Do you have a spooky story, near-death experience, or supernatural happening you'd like to share? I'd love to hear it. Submit your story to sashagraham.com with Ghost Stories by the Fire in the subject line. You might just wind up on this podcast. And if you want to support it and keep the ghost stories coming, head on over to sashagraham.com to check out my books and tarot decks, which are available for purchase at your favorite bookseller. The Ghost Stories by the Fire theme song is titled Lovely, from the original motion picture score of The Deeper You Dig, a film about the lengths a mother will go to find her daughter's killer. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, I'm saving you a seat at the fire.